Hello, fellow devs. Welcome to our first lesson of our JavaScript series. Aren't you excited? Well, I am. And without wasting my time, let's just jump right into the first lesson. So, the first lesson, we are going to be dealing with scopes in JavaScript. That's one lesson that is mostly skipped in most tutorials, but I feel it's crucial to probably understanding the foundation. So let's first open our VS Code. You can see my VS Code is already opened. Then you can decide to create a new file, name it whatever you like. Then we can start by creating our folder, that's scope, or let's just say lesson one. Yeah, that should work. But before anything else, taking into account that I probably already have npm installed or node so that you can be able to run your JavaScript code. So let's just say, oh, it's like I don't have it installed. Let me, yep. Okay, so now I can run npm dash v. Yep. So as you can see, I have npm installed. I think it's a good node. That's the expression. Yep. I also have that installed. So you should most definitely have node installed, or else you probably not be able to run the JavaScript code. Um, Let me just navigate and let's go back to the actual work. So let's just start by explaining what scope is in JavaScript. So probably scope in any programming language, to break it down for you, is the area in which your code is running. So yes, you have your entire file, but when the code is being run, it actually runs in sections. So those sections are what we call the scope of where that particular variable is being set or that particular function is being declared. So those are what we call the scope. So to put it in another term, you can take it like you have a house full of toys. Now those toys are within that particular room. When you come out, you can't use those toys. They're only for that room. So when you go to another room, it has its own toys that you have to use. So that's something for the non-technical people. So let's just move directly into the practical aspects. That's why we are here. So let's try and create our first scope. We have two types of scope in JavaScript actually. That's the block scope and then the functional scope. So before ES6 was launched, there was only one scope. That was the functional scope. So we'll take a look at the functional scope first to clearly understand what it means. So let's just take an example. And don't worry if you don't understand most of the syntax right now. You would probably get that. I think the size is a little down and just increase that here. So scope, we'll just say hello world. Or let's just put one just to make it a little bit, yeah. So now let's create a functional scope, then we'll explain from there. So functional scope, yeah, yeah, it's doing lots of work for me. Yeah, so let's just say one scope 2, then yeah, Copilot. Yeah, so let me just explain what's actually going on. So over here, we have our first declaration, or let's say the first scope, which we can say this the whole entire file is what we call the global scope because it covers the entire file. It's not within anything. Now, when we move here, this is what we call a function. So within the function, we have its body. That's the body containing the opening brackets and the closing curly brackets. So within this body, that's where the scope entails. So over here, let's say over here, yeah. So over here is the scope. So as you can see, this is the global scope, and then this is the functional scope. So now, if I want to access this scope outside of the function, that would actually give me an error. So let's console log this and just see what's going on. So not the one Copilot. So the two. Yeah. So as you can see, even Copilot know that it will not be defined, but and I think I'm having some squiggly lines here. So could not find scope 2. It didn't mean scope. So as you can see, it actually can't find this particular scope because it's within this. It's within the function. So it cannot be seen outside. So that's what scope literally means. It's within its own room that I can only use it within this function. And I cannot use it outside the function. So if let's say you wanted to run this code, think node think of the file name code yes. Yeah. So as you can see, it says scope 2 not defined. That's like showing an error. So if you are to probably just say, let's comment this out and then try and run this in here. Then let's call our function over here. Yeah. So we just go back, then run our code, and we get scope 2. Works like a charm. Yeah. So what you are seeing over here is because scope is within the function. We are calling within the function. So it can actually be found. But now let's look at the global scope. So since there's the global scope, it can be accessed anywhere. It's not within any curly brackets or anything of that sort. It can be accessed anywhere. So we can easily call the first scope over here and it will work just fine. So let's see. Yep, scope 2 and scope 1, just like we see over here. So if you don't understand the syntax and the functions and those variables, don't worry. We'll get to that sooner rather than later. So the next thing we are going to look at is the block scope. So let's just come down here. So with the block scope in JavaScript, when we talk about block or something, anything related to block, what we mean is these curly brackets, the opening and closing. So within these curly brackets is what we call the block scope. So anything within it is tied to the block scope. So even in some cases, we can make reference to the function this here as a block scope. But since it's tied to a function, the underline or the engineering behind it has made in such a way that it works directly with the function. So that's why we call this the functional scope. But it's also the body. So over here you can see this. And if you have ever done any program before, if statements use block scope, loops use block scope here. So you can see if statements use the block scope, for a loop statement use the block scope. So those are the few stuff that mostly use the block scope. So let's take a look at an example here. Let's try this. Let's try let scope 3. So just like how the functional scope works, this scope cannot be used outside. So if we try to access this over here, it will also give us an undefined. so cannot be defined. But if you try to access that in there, it works perfectly. So why is that? So this is like the body, and anything that is defined inside the body cannot be used outside. It's as simple as that. Anything defined within your body cannot be used outside. So the scope helps to keep access of your variables so that you don't misuse them or call them at separate places that you probably get confused. So because this is only tied to this body, I can still come out and still define the same scope name 3 and to still work because this is defined outside. It's not within this body. So some of, let's say, if let's say an if statement, so let's just use something like if true, let's make it simple. We can define certain scope within this body. Copilot is helping us. So here you have scope 4. No, Copilot, I want 4. Yeah. So scope 4 within this is a new defined body. So this is the block. This is what we mean by the block. So it's just the body of the if statement. So normally using the functional and then the block, those are the difference. So this is the block and then this is the functional block, or I say the functional scope, and this is the block scope. Basically, that's what both scopes are for. And if we are to talk about probably a parent scope or hear that anywhere, so parent scope just means that in some code you probably see something like this, a function within a function. Yeah, so let's say inner function, then let's say okay, inner function. So this is the inner function that's within this outer function. So in this sense, this function's outer scope or parent scope becomes this particular body. That's its parent scope. Then this parent scope, this scope function's parent scope becomes the entire file. So normally, in some sense, you will mostly just see functions parent scope being the global scope. But in some cases, too, you see a function having an inner function. In this case, its parent scope becomes the outer function. Okay, so you made it to the end of the video. That's amazing. I know that was a lot to take in, but trust me, it gets easier. Before you take a leave, there's a simple exercise I want to take a look at. You can pause the video and try it out. If you still don't get it, there are a few tips that you can look at. If that's also not helping, the solution will be on GitHub and the link will be in the description. Or you can just hit the comment section, tell me what you didn't understand, give me your feedback so I can help improve. See you next time. Thank you for joining me.